Hi guys, Drea from Aloha Plant Life here and welcome back to my channel. And today I wanted to kind of take a moment to rank my Calathea for you guys in terms of which ones I have found to be the hardest to take care of versus which ones I have found to be the easiest to take care of. And just remember, this is all going to be based on my personal experience. And in the process of putting this video together for you guys, I started to notice some similarities in the plants that I feel like are the hardest Calathea and some similarities in the ones that I feel like are the easier ones. So I'm going to talk about those as we go along, and hopefully that will help you kind of identify when you're shopping for plants, if you're going to be buying a Calathea, whether or not it might be more difficult to take care of or easier to take care of. And there is one plant that I am going to save till the end of this list because it is controversial and not a lot of people would place it where I'm going to place it in my list. So we'll see what you think about where I decide to place it. But I think we're actually going to go from hardest to easiest today because honestly, I realized that I have never shown you what I consider to have been the most difficult to take care of Calathea for me so far in my experience. So we're going to start with that one. And that one is my Calathea ornata, otherwise known as a Pinstripe Calathea, and known as that because of these stripes on the leaves, these kind of pinkish pinstripey type markings on these dark green leaves, almost a spade shape to that leaf, and absolutely love this plant. So this was the very first Calathea that I actually ever owned. I ordered it online from a very reputable Etsy seller. It came in beautiful, it was gorgeous, it was full, and then last fall we got spider mites. Always with the spider mites, and that is one thing to keep in mind with Calathea. They are spider mite magnets in my experience, so definitely be doing preventative pest treatment measures and just keeping a very close eye on it. But this plant did get a pretty bad infestation, and unfortunately it happened right when we were moving into the seasons where things start to get a little bit more complicated with keeping some Calathea looking their best. So we did end up having a lot of leaves crisp up and kind of roll up and turn yellow and do weird things, and part of that was, I think, part of the pest control treatment that I did to this plant. I know some of those leaves were lost due to that. But then after that, in general, this plant just did nothing over the winter for me. It completely went dormant, no new leaves whatsoever, and those leaves that had gotten crispy started to get more and more crispy and kind of rolling up. And this is the only Calathea that I put directly next to a large humidifier during the winter, and even that didn't help. And then when spring came around, the leaves that were left that had that crispiness on them, because I had cut some of the leaves off, but the ones that were left started to turn bright yellow, like the bright yellow that makes you think you've overwatered something and freaks you out bright yellow. And then they slowly kind of died off. And so I cut them off as they did that, and we were left with these 3 leaves, which, by the way, it's kind of very sculptural, you know, it's not totally bad looking. It's giving me a kind of like an 80s side, like, I don't know, ponytail type situation vibe. But yeah, we were left with these 3 leaves, and then just recently we started pushing out this one new leaf here that you can see that's coming in, and there's some other growth points that are starting to press up from the base of this plant. So now that we are fully into the spring season, this plant is starting to pick back up its growth and it's going to start to fill back out. But once again, most problematic one for me during the problematic months, which are fall and winter. So let's move on to my second most problematic, and I have called her that to you in several other videos as well. So no surprise here that Rosie is going to be up next. So here is Rosie, my rosepicta, aka Medallion Calathea. And once again, quick reminder that Calathea actually have been reclassified as Goeppertia, but everybody still just calls them Calathea, but just keep that in mind. Technically not Calathea anymore. But Rosie has been my second most problematic. She's actually looking way better now probably than you guys have ever seen her before. There's like barely any crispiness left on those leaves, and part of the reason for that is because she did, similarly to the ornata, all the leaves that had all that crispiness, when we hit spring, they started turning bright yellow, making me think she was overwatered again, and then slowly dying off. So I started cutting them off one by one, and that yellowing and dying off only happened to the leaves that had significant, like a ½ inch or more crispiness around the edge of the leaves. And she gave me the most crispy leaves second to the ornata during the fall and winter. Now, Rosie did not go completely dormant during the fall and winter for me. I know for a fact I got at least 1 new leaf during that time period, but I think I might have gotten like 2. So she did slow down in growth significantly, but she didn't go completely dormant like the ornata did. Now, I would like to point out that Rosie has gotten multiple new leaves since spring came around, unlike the ornata that's only getting one so far, and Rosie I can see right now does have even yet another one coming in right now. So definitely has picked up that growth rate more quickly as well. But I did notice when I was pulling these and ranking them that there's some similarities going on here. And so the first thing that I noticed when I was looking at these ones that I was listing on the harder end of the spectrum was that they all have relatively thick stems. So if I get up in here, you can see those are pretty thick stems compared to some of the ones that I'm going to be showing you when we get into the easier category. And so the ornata also has relatively thicker stems, as does the next plant on our list, which is my orbifolia. So let me trade Rosie out for that guy. So once again, this is my orbifolia, big and beautiful. And as you can see with this one, if I get close up in here, these are very thick stems as well. So these might actually be the thickest, kind of, sort of. I guess they're about the same thickness as Rosie, and this is a more mature plant, so that's probably why they're like, you know, thicker. Eventually Rosie and the ornata, when they get this big, will probably be just as thick with their stems. But this plant was my third most problematic, especially over the fall and winter, but it did not get nearly as many crispy leaf tips to the level that Rosie did, and definitely not to the level of the ornata. And the leaves that did get it were the very oldest leaves, and so that kind of, to me, was like, okay, well, those leaves might just be reaching the end of their natural leaf cycle anyway. However, spring rolled around, and just like with Rosie and the ornata, every leaf that had any kind of significant crisping to it turned bright yellow and died off, or more accurately, I cut it off before it died off just to help promote new growth to come in, which it did. And this plant did not go completely dormant for me in the fall or winter. It put out more new leaves than Rosie did, so that's why I kind of bumped it further up towards the easy end of the spectrum when ranking these plants. And like I said, it did not get as many crispy leaves either. So now that we are into spring, it has put out several new leaves as well. So definitely picking back up even more quickly than Rosie did. So that's kind of why I put it in the place that I did. Now, another common thing I noticed with these first three plants was that these are relatively large, relatively round shaped leaves versus the smaller lance-shaped leaves that you're going to be seeing on some of the plants that are on the easier end of the scale. So if you're keeping tally, so far the three hardest plants, thick stems, big round leaves. I'm not saying there's a guarantee that that is what makes them more difficult. I'm just saying it's something that I've noticed they have in common, and they are on my more difficult end of the spectrum. But still absolutely love all of them, especially this orbifolia. So gorgeous. Gonna set this one back aside. Now the next two on this list are moving more into what I would classify as the easier Calathea to care for, and I kind of went back and forth on which of these I wanted in which position, and I finally settled on putting the Calathea makoyana in the next position behind the orbifolia, and there's several reasons for that. So here is the makoyana, once again, also commonly referred to as a peacock plant. I don't know if you guys just saw that fly in front of it. If you did, I'm sorry. It's just appeared out of nowhere. I really wish it would go away. But anyways, so this plant, once again, I felt like it went more dormant than some of my other Calatheas during the fall and winter, but it did put out slightly more growth than the orbifolia during that time. I definitely had less crisping of the leaves. Really, honestly, I had like almost no crisping of the leaves. There's just two of them, and they just have tiny little bits, and honestly, I think I just waited too long to water them, and that's when that happened. But definitely less than the orbifolia. And then when spring did roll around, I didn't get any bright yellow leaves or anything, not even on the leaves that had crisping like I did on the previous three plants that I mentioned to you. So this plant picked back up growth when spring came around. It's put out a couple of new leaves so far, but yeah, I really haven't had a big problem with anything on this one. And thankfully, it's one of the ones, knock on wood, that's never gotten spider mites. But it did grow less throughout the winter for me than the next few ones that are gonna be on this list. And so that's why I finally decided that I was gonna put it in this spot on the list. Now, these are still roundish shaped leaves like the previous three that I stated were more difficult. This plant is a little bit more juvenile than those plants, but these leaves still are not going to get as big ever really as those first three that I showed you. And as you can see, if I can get up in here for you to see well, these stems are much thinner. Much thinner stems. And so then, like I said, I started noticing that as we moved into these easier plants, the stems got thinner and thinner. And you'll see what I mean even more on the next few plants. So let me go ahead and trade this one out for Freddie. So this is Calathea Freddie, also scientifically known as, I believe it's Calathea concinna, I think. And Freddie is definitely a very thin stemmed, about the same thinness though really as the makoyana. But Freddie actually kept putting out more leaves consistently than the makoyana during the fall and the winter, and I really didn't have any kind of crispy leaf tip issues or anything like that. Spring came around, we didn't have the bright yellowing of the leaves, but then something interesting happened and Freddie flowered. And I'm showing you here like what those flowers looked like. It took me off guard when I walked into my bedroom one day and was like, oh my gosh, like Freddie's got a bunch of flowers. So Freddie is the only Calathea that I own that has flowered so far. And Freddie didn't want to stop flowering. So I'll have to double check how long ago I saw those flowers coming in. I'll post it on screen for you. And yeah, he just kept flowering. And even now I still got some flowers in there. I don't know if you can see, there's one that's kind of dying off there. And so as Freddie decided he was just going to focus on flowering, and I did at one point start trying to get in there and cut them off to promote more leaf growth, but nope, Freddie just wanted to keep on flowering. And as he kept flowering more and more, then I started getting some weird leaf issues, such as this leaf over here. You can see it's kind of crispy on the ends, but that didn't happen until he decided all he wanted to do was focus on flowering. And then this started happening, and then now I've had a couple of leaves turn bright yellow that I've had to cut off. But I did notice when I was grabbing him today that we do appear to be putting out our first new leaf of the spring season. So maybe that means we're done flowering and we're going to kick off that growth again now. But that is why I was kind of struggling about whether I was going to put him in the previous position or the makoyana, but I don't know if he's going to do this every single year, if he's going to flower every single year, if conditions were just right. It did happen right after I had repotted him, which seemed kind of weird to me because you think the plant would be too stressed to try to flower, but who knows, he flowered anyway. So I'm happy to see that now we're getting new leaves in, and it still was really exciting to have a Calathea flower since it had never happened to me before. But absolutely love Freddie, definitely on the easier end of the spectrum in my opinion, in my experience. Oh, and before I forget, if you will notice, Freddie has more of a lance shape to those leaves versus being super round, and it is relatively smaller than those first three plants that I said were more difficult. So I'm going to trade Freddie out for an even more lance-shaped leaf plant, my Rattlesnake Calathea. So this is my Rattlesnake Calathea, also known as a Calathea insignis, and as you can see, a very lance-shaped leaves. And once again, let me flip it around this way, you can see super thin stems, probably even slightly thinner than Freddie and the makoyana, and definitely one of the easiest Calatheas. This one did not stop growing at all during the fall and winter. It did not skip a beat. It kept pushing out new leaves. I really didn't have any issues with crisping up on the leaves except for the ones that are in the middle, because as you can see, this is a much more compact growing Calathea. And so there's leaves down there in the middle that are small that never get the light. And because they never get the light, eventually they crisp up and they die. But those are the only ones, and that's expected because they're not getting any of that light contact to be able to photosynthesize. So that is normal. I have not had any leaves turn bright yellow like on the other ones that I mentioned this spring, and it has just kept on growing. So definitely one of the easiest to care for Calatheas in my experience and in my opinion, and I do own 3 of these now. I have this one, the one that my friend gave me for my birthday, and then I have the one from the Is It Really Dead video, and actually I brought that out because I wanted to give y'all a quick update because I realized in my recent plant update video, I didn't give you an update on this plant. So we did finally lose that one leaf that had been hanging on, that wasn't even a full leaf, it had been hanging on that way for about 9 months. That leaf finally did completely die right after the new leaf finally came in, and it is just a little baby leaf, but that's expected given what this plant's been through. So it did finally get its new leaf, And I tried before this filming to see if I could get close enough up on that soil for you, and I couldn't, but there is another new leaf starting to come in now. And now that we're in the spring growing season, I think it's really going to start to push out more and more growth. And then over time, it's going to start to push out bigger and bigger leaves. So super happy about that. So once again, super resilient too, apparently, Calathea. Now, the next Calathea that I want to show you is a bit controversial, as I stated at the start of this video. So let me go grab that one real quick. So this is my Calathea White Fusion, and she did recently have spider mites. I think I've gotten rid of all of them, but I wanted to clear everybody else out of the way before I brought her out, just to be on the safe side. But this plant is a plant that a lot of people say is impossible to keep alive, that is so difficult to care for. And honestly, that has not been my experience at all. Now, spider mites have been a big issue with this one for sure, and I'll explain why I think it's even more of a problem than with some of the other Calathea here in a second. But I did show in the Is It Really Dead video that this plant also had died almost all the way back to like, I think it was 3 or 4 leaves. I'll flash it up on screen for you again so you can see what it looked like. And now we've come back to this. And we came back to this over the winter months. Let me repeat that. We went from what you just saw to this over fall and winter. And look at her now. Totally big, bushy, gorgeous. She is just looking fabulous, even though she just had spider mites again. So once again, I have a hard time saying this is the most difficult. This would have been at the start of this video for a lot of people as hands down one of the most difficult Calatheas. I'm putting it at the end because honestly, you guys, I don't know if it's quite as easy as the Rattlesnake Calathea, primarily because of the spider mites, which once again, I'll get to that in a second, but I definitely would put it as second most easy for sure. And once again, it has those lance-shaped leaves. Like I said, I felt like the easier Calathea have. It's so jam-packed right now, you can't see the stems, but they're even thinner, I feel like, than the Rattlesnake Calathea. So once again, those are the things I see in common with those easier Calatheas. And it does not really have that big of a problem with crispy leaves when we were growing during the fall and winter and we were putting all this new foliage back out. Now, like the Rattlesnake Calathea, because it's so compact, it grows so compact, you will get some leaves that crisp up and die off in the middle because they can't get to the light. But I honestly have not had a huge problem with this plant other than the spider mites. And I think the spider mites are not a bigger issue in terms of it gets them more frequently than the other plants. I think they're just harder to get rid of. And that's because it is so full, and these leaves also have that rippled texture and they stay kind of like slightly rolled. And so I think it's just easier for the spider mites to hide in places that you can't get with a spray bottle when you're trying to spray pest spray on it. So actually, the last time it got spider mites recently, I kind of decided I'd had enough. I mixed up a big bowl of my DIY pest mix, and I literally tipped her upside down, dunked her in that bowl, swirled her around for a good 30 seconds, and then took her out. No lie. It's totally what I did. I was really fed up. But I think it worked. And obviously she has taken better to that DIY pest treatment than she did the neem oil, which is what I had originally treated her with the first time she got spider mites that led to us losing all of those leaves. So yeah, I know it's not going to be a popular opinion, but I think the White Fusion Calathea is kind of easy. Comment down below though and let me know which Calathea you own that you have found to be the most difficult versus the most easiest. I'm really interested to see what other people's experiences have been. And one other thing I really want to point out real quick is the fact that most of these Calathea I own were bought as 4-inch plants, with the exception of I think 2 of them were bought as 6-inch plants. And actually it was one of my earliest subscribers, Marissa, who comments on almost every single video. Thank you, Marissa. She actually made me think about this because she was talking the other day in a comment about the fact that she has had a much easier time acclimating immature plants into her home versus more mature plants. And I think that holds especially true when it comes to Calathea. They get too used to that perfect greenhouse environment the older they get. And it's almost kind of like that old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. They're so set in their ways, they're so used to that greenhouse environment if you're buying a more mature plant, that then you bring them into your home and they struggle to acclimate. Versus a young plant, which like a young child, seems to be able to bounce back from almost anything that happens to it. So I would highly recommend when shopping for Calathea that you buy them less mature. try not to get those giant ones because I think they're gonna have a bigger struggle with those. So just to summarize here, traits when you're shopping for Calathea of harder to care for Calatheas, once again in my own personal experience, thicker stems, bigger rounder leaves, more mature plant. Traits of those easier Calathea to look out for when you're shopping for Calathea, thinner stems, more lance-shaped leaves, younger, less mature plants. If you've enjoyed this video, please remember to hit that like and or subscribe button down below. And if you need a little bit more help and information on just how to care for Calathea and keep them their happiest any time of year, be sure to check out this video where I get more in depth into how to care for these gorgeous plants. Thank you so much for joining me today, you guys, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!